A small landlord in Washington, D.C., who rented out his condo as part of a city's program to resolve homelessness almost became homeless himself after the tenant stopped paying rent during the eviction moratorium. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the fate of yet another landlord who got screwed over by the whole eviction moratorium nonsense. But this one goes even further than that. So this landlord, he had a condo in Washington, D.C., and he decided he was going to enter this condo where, he owned into this program to help out the homeless. Basically, the city would pay part of the rent for a homeless person or a homeless family to live in this unit, and then the homeless people would have somewhere to live. He would make a little bit of rental money and everything would be good. Unfortunately, the tenant started causing some issues, so he wanted to get rid of this tenant, and unfortunately, then another problem happened, the eviction moratorium. So he wasn't able to get rid of the tenant. The tenant got kicked out of the program, and he didn't get any rent for a very long period of time. So he almost became homeless himself. This is a nightmare situation, okay? And I bring this up because once again, we have a case of a person who owns just one rental property, a person who thinks they're doing something good by helping out the city, entering their property into this program to help the homeless, and then getting completely screwed over by the tenant and by the city. So this is why I tell everybody, don't get into the landlord business if you have these, I'm going to be a charity, I'm going to help out the poor, I'm going to help out those in need. Landlording is a business, and unless you operate as a business, you're going to get screwed over. And even if you do operate as a business, a lot of the times the government, the laws, the politicians are working against you. So go where you're treated the best, okay? That's one of my favorite quotes from Andrew Henderson, the Nomad Capitalist. Go where you're treated best. Well, in the U.S., obviously the best place to be a landlord is in the South and in the Midwest. That's where the landlord-friendly states are located, okay? Where you're not going to get treated as though you are this big, rich villain. You're going to have laws that are friendly towards you and fair towards tenants. That's what I say. When you're in these places like, the Midwest or the South, where they say, hey, these are landlord-friendly laws, those laws are still fair to the tenants. It's not like the tenants are getting screwed over, but they are held accountable, okay? That's the difference. When you're up in these far left-leaning liberal places, the tenants are not held accountable for their bad behavior, for not paying rent, for treating you like garbage, for treating your property like garbage. And that's what I can't stand, okay? I'm just asking that, they are treated fairly and we are treated fairly. So, before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think, okay? What do you think of these people who get into the landlord business with the intention, never having the intention of actually making money, but, wanting to basically run a charity, help out the poor, help out the lower income, okay? I don't agree with it, okay? I don't think that's a good reason to to go through all the trouble of becoming a landlord, and especially not a small landlord. I've heard of these large nonprofits and everything, and even they struggle because they have to deal with the same low-income tenants as us, right? And they realize, hey, these tenants are not great in a lot of situations, and they will tear our property up. And I've heard of things such as that local housing authorities having some of the highest number of evictions of any landlord in the entire city. That's what happens in New York even, you think it's odd that the public housing has a high number of evictions? I mean, that's just proof positive that even when you're in a place where, it's a nonprofit, where basically the tenant is living in super duper subsidized housing, they still can't behave correctly. Okay. So stop blaming the landlords for all these problems and realize that, hey, tenants themselves are causing a lot of these problems. This article comes from NBCWashington.com, and it says, man says he almost became homeless after renting his condo out in DC program. Yeah, let's get into these details because this is a interesting situation this guy's in. A DC man who rented out his condo as part of a city program to curb homelessness says he almost ended up homeless himself. I was taken from my home, and the DC government just totally disregarded that, Robert Butler said. In 2018, he entered his 2-bedroom condo into DC's rapid rehousing program. It sounds like a great thing because it was only a year and, everything goes back to normal. I get my apartment back and it made a little extra cash, he said. At first, it was great. He met his tenant, a young mother. When she came to the apartment to apply, she was like, Mr. Butler, I really need this, for me and my children, Butler said. Yeah, at first everything is great, and this is the way it works when you're a landlord. And this guy, it doesn't sound like he has any other properties, like any other rental units or anything. He just has this one condo. So he didn't know the issues that could be involved with this. And, his original intention was to only participate in this program for a year. So, I understand, make a little bit extra money. And that way, if he has a mortgage on it, he could pay the mortgage off and, everything is good. The money's guaranteed by the government. Just keep going. It sounds like a good program from the outside, but there's a reason why a lot of landlords don't want to deal with government programs, don't want to deal with like Section 8 or housing assistance in any way. And you're going to find out why here in a moment. For all that year, the program run by DC's Department of Human Services paid her rent, just shy of $1,500 a month. At the end of 2018, Butler said he did not want to renew the lease, but the city exercised an option to keep her in the property anyway, which is allowed in the program. They kept telling me she has a right to request an extension, said Butler. Midway through 2019, he said he fell on hard times, medically and financially, and needed to move back into his condo. In November 2019, he let his rental business license lapse because he didn't want to be a landlord anymore and hoped she'd be moving out. He said the one consolation was that DC government kept paying the rent through January 2020 when it stopped and his troubles really started. So yeah, he wanted to get out of the landlord business, right? And after that first year was up, he wanted her to move out so he could move back in. But then the government was like, no, we have this option. You signed a contract. He might not have even known about it, but they had the option to renew the lease for this tenant for another year. So, he went ahead. He was like, okay, but when that's over, I need her out because he's going through financial trouble at this point. He's going, he's got medical issues according to this article, and he needs to move back into his place. But he couldn't do that because the tenant was still in there and the city was, still paying him. So I'm sure as long as he was still getting paid, it wasn't an issue yet. But as you'll soon see, he wasn't going to be getting paid for much longer. They was like, well, she's no longer in the program. Like, oh well. And then she just boldly told me she wasn't going nowhere. It was crazy, Butler said. Of course, that wasn't the only crazy thing happening in February and March of 2020. The whole world was shutting down because of COVID-19. At that point, he said he was only out about $3,000 in back rent, but he'd been couch surfing among family and friends, and from April to October, he had to move to a hotel. He said in all of those months, the tenant didn't pay a dime, which the city said she would be responsible for if she had been exited from the program. So she got kicked out of the program, right? And when she got kicked out, the city stopped paying him rent. So this was, according to this was January of 2020 when they stopped paying. That was horrible timing for him, right? So from January until March, he was working to try to get her out of there, but then the pandemic began, right? And the eviction moratoriums began with them. So now he's stuck. He's unable to evict this tenant. The tenant isn't paying him anything. The city, which kicked her out of the program, isn't paying him anything. And he has nowhere to live. So he is basically living on the couches of his friends and family This guy is homeless because the city would not allow him to remove this tenant from the property, and he's getting paid nothing. So yeah, he is in deep trouble. And I mean, I hate, but this is an awful situation for this guy, you know? And part of the reason I bring up this article is because, you know, looking at the picture here, you know, this is not the typical landlord. You know, he's a minority, you know, he's a black guy like I am, right? He owns one property. He's a small landlord like I am. So when you get the image that, you know, oh yeah, you know, it's these rich guys, they've always got a ton of money, and, you know, they're off in the Bahamas somewhere drinking martinis. That is a false image of landlords. A lot of landlords are like myself, and this is our financial, you know, retirement plan. This is our way that we make a little bit of extra cash, and there's nothing wrong with that. You know, it's one of the few businesses that has a low barrier to entry that a lot of people get into because of that. And so I like to highlight that, hey, small landlords especially are going through this nonsense. Okay, so awful situation this landlord's going to going through right now, and I hope that things work out. But let me skip down a little bit. Maybe it says here if he was able to finally get this tenant out. Okay, so it says, Butler said the renter racked up more than $28,000 in missed rent payments in 2020 and 2021. That meant he fell about $10,000 behind $10,000 on his condo fees and utilities. It's had an impact on me. The stress, he said, it was terrible. His best hope of getting that money back was a pandemic program called Stay DC. It was also administered by DHS and designed for exactly this kind of thing. The program has been really successful, Pierre said. We have over 34,000 unique families who successfully were able to receive our rental assistance excuse me, and be able to stay in their home ultimately during the public health emergency. Butler and his tenant both applied. Email correspondence shows their applications were joined together, and he said the money was approved. It said it was sent out and that she received it, he said. She cashed it for at least $23,488. But according to him, that didn't resolve his problems. She gave me $5,000, and then she says, well, next week I'm going to have a little more, he said. Yeah, that's right. So they apply for rental assistance, and rather than paying the landlord, they paid the tenant a check for $23,488. And then once the tenant gets the check, the tenant pays $5,000 of the, it says that, she owes him over $28,000. So the tenant only paid him $5,000 and then pocketed the rest. You see, this is my problem with these idiotic cities that put in place these policies that pay the tenants the rental assistance instead of the landlords. This is so stupid. So we got a homeless landlord who just wanted to move back into his property, and then you're going to pay a tenant a bonus to live in someone else's property for free. This tenant got a check so that they could stay in this property for free. The people in D.C., they should be ashamed. They should be ashamed that this guy is freaking homeless while this tenant got to live in his property and they wrote her a check. Idiots, okay? I have nothing more to say than this, okay? They are 100% idiots.